scary books? Do you like books for young children? Do you like books for young adult children? Do you like scary books? Well, I know I do. And today we have an author who is right on target. My name is Vin Dacquino. Our next guest is Suzanne Weyn. And what a writer she is. Suzanne?
Hello.
Let's talk writing. A pleasure to have you here.
It's great to be
You
here.
are a prolific author. You've written a number of books, and you have so much to talk about. So we're going to have to get that all into our little show today. So I want to know, who is Suzanne Weyn? How did you get into all of this writing?
Well, I started writing when I was a kid, and because I thought it was so fun to just write, I didn't think of it as a career. I thought it was something you did for fun. I went to school in New York State. I went to community college for theater and SUNY Binghamton for English literature, and then I got my master's from Pace in teaching young adults. So I'm a New Yorker. I live in Putnam County, and so after school, I got into publishing, and while I was waiting on table trying to become an actress, someone called me and said, you can have my job at a teen magazine if you would like it. And I said, sure, yeah.
So you were an editor at that?
I became an editor and a writer at first Teen Bag and then Teen Beat, and that was a lot of fun. At the time, we were.
So these are magazines that are dedicated to
fan, celebrity.
Yeah, like a young adult or middle readers?
Yeah, 12,
Yeah.
13 years old.
Yeah, wow.
And that was a lot of fun. We would take limos up to the plaza and interview these different teen celebrities, and then go home and eat hot dogs for dinner.
There was no Justin Bieber then, right?
No, but there was Sean Cassidy and that crew.
Of course.
And from there, my editor there went to Scholastic, and she hired me at Scholastic. So for a while, I worked on the educational magazines there.
Wow.
And then I went over to work for a small press that was run by the wife of R.L. Stine.
Oh, R.L. Stine, wow.
Who I knew from Scholastic, because he was also a Scholastic writer and a magazine editor, too.
He actually wrote a whole series of some of these scary books.
Yes, yeah. Well, the Goosebumps series,
the
of
Goosebumps
course.
series.
And so there I worked a little bit as his editor on different things, and I got to be friendly with him and his wife. And so from there, but I learned a lot while I was there. I made a lot of contacts in the publishing world, and I wrote my first book for free, basically. I had come up with an idea. That was part of my job, was to come up with ideas for books that I didn't write, that we then gave to other authors.
Right.
Which gave me confidence that I could come up with ideas for books. And so I came up with one idea called the Makeover Club that Avon, which is not around anymore, but they wanted it, but they didn't want to pay much for it. So I said, I'll do it.
Books.
I said, I'll do it. So I did it. It's the only book I ever wrote on a typewriter, and it was covered with whiteout every afternoon. But so that launched me, and then I got a job doing a Nancy Drew book for Simon & Schuster, which was a thrill of a lifetime to me because I grew up reading Nancy Drew. So that was it. But from then, that gave me the nerve to go out on my own. So at that point.
So then your first book is, which one of these?
None of them. This is the Makeover Club.
So, but then, I mean, as an independent author, then you went out on your own, and is there an order to all of this? Wonderful?
Not really. These little baby books I wrote for Marvel Books when they were trying to launch a book club series. And these actually, if you go online and look for them, cost more than all these books because they're out of print.
Wow.
So they're actually collector's items. So yeah, I did a lot of when I went out.
Even pop-ups. Is this Mommy's Pocket?
Mommy's Pocket. Yeah, it's a little puppet here. These I did for Reader's Digest. They jump out of these little holes here. So.
Yeah, cool. Look at that.
So it's a real baby book. Yeah. It's a board book.
Yeah.
And so.
So you started with the baby books or no?
I started with middle grade, pretty much, which is grades 4 to 6, pretty much. But then the life of a freelancer,
Yep.
which I've done for a long time, I started just making a living, not thinking of really writing. I kind of chop my career into, in my mind, I chop it in two places. One was just doing, I did novelizations where they give you the movie script and you turn it into a book.
Oh, right.
I did some of these baby things. I did some licensed characters.
Yeah.
But then in 2005, I sold the Barcode Tattoo. And I had been trying to sell it for about 10 years.
Wow.
And it went from one publisher to the next, and maybe
Yep.
yes, maybe no. It sat on the author's pile for like
I
a
know,
year.
I know.
A year.
That's a big discussion I have with a number of my authors. I work with many authors. And big question today is, do I go traditional publisher or do I self-publish?
Right.
Well, at one time, self-publishing was vanity press. And you did it because you couldn't do anything
Right.
else. And you weren't good enough for real books. Well, things have changed big time. And there's a lot of writers out there who are self-publishing, and they're in this new thing was invented called the computer and the web. And big time, because now you can self-publish, and people in London could be reading your book in 3 weeks, 4 weeks. And there was a time when it would take 2 years to get an idea, out of your computer and into them, or 10 years.
Well, that was
Me
10
too.
years. But 2 years, it just sat on the stack in Scholastic. Once they said, yes, we're interested, then it sat for over a year.
Yeah, and that is a problem. So that's a big discussion right now on whether you self-publish or not. So, but you did go to Scholastic with that one. And then where'd you go after Barcode Tattoo? Yeah, that's hard to remember.
Yeah, no,
Did you stay in young adult? Because that's a young adult,
yes,
right?
young adult. Well, what I did was some more novelizations and more license. But in the meantime, this did pretty well. I remember I went into the bookstore. I had an advanced copy of that, and I sent my daughter into Barnes and Noble. I said, just put this on the shelf just to mess them up.
Yeah,
And she did. I don't know what happened to it. But it sold very well on their book clubs at Scholastic.
good, yeah.
And so there was a request for a second book. And then there was, the Barcode Rebellion right there.
Oh, wow.
So that was an interesting
So
challenge.
this is a series, Barcode Tattoo, Barcode Rebellion,
and then Barcode Prophecy, which I just wrote in 2013.
Oh, wow. Wow, so this- yeah.
This has been a good seller, and it's in schools as part of the curriculum, and it's in book clubs, so it's done very well, because I remember going into Barnes & Noble and finding it was just one book sitting on the shelf
I
with
know.
no advertising, nothing, but it was the little book that could. It found its feet, and
Yeah, and that sometimes books have to do that. Just give me a rough idea. Barcode,
okay, the barcode you see right up here,
Yeah.
the barcode, and on all of them.
right?
I was meeting a friend who had just flown in from Dallas, and she handed me a piece of paper, and it said, the end of the world is coming, because in Revelations it's 666 is the mark of the beast, and if you don't have the mark of the beast on you, you won't be able to buy or sell. So I went and did some research on that, and I started to think, what would happen if you couldn't buy or sell? Especially if you couldn't sell, because when you have a job, you're selling your services.
Yeah,
So if you
that's what you're
can't
doing.
sell, you can't work, and if you can't work,
Really?
so I began thinking of a world where you had this barcode tattoo on your wrist, and you had to present it in order to. There was no more cash, money, or credit cards. It was all in your
Oh my
barcode.
God, that's pretty scary. That's almost real.
Well, it's become. This is
I know.
2005.
Now you get your phone, you put your phone. I mean, that's scary.
So then in 1995, when I started to try to sell it, everyone was like, nah.
I
But
know.
as I got closer and closer, it started to seem plausible. And I sold it to the person who was most interested in was the author David Levithan, who is an award-winning author in his own right. But at the time, he was much younger, and I think he was just a little more, because he was younger, he was tuned into these kinds of things.
Right.
And so he presented it, but I don't want to say anything that I shouldn't. But it took a long time. Once he
Yeah.
presented it, it took a long time.
That is the truth. And same thing, you know, my writers always ask me, should I get an agent? And, you know, I want to tell them what I really feel is that agents are good, but they also take time. And by the time you get through them, and then they have to get to the publisher, and the publisher has to get to you, your novel idea isn't so novel anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
And that's why it went from you used to have, I sold this on an outline, and you can't really do that anymore. Because the thing is, everything moves so fast
Yep.
that they don't want to give you a year to write your book anymore. They want to see that that
Yeah.
book is what's
Yeah.
trending and go with
Yeah.
it right away. So yeah, that's changed.
I'm going through that right now with History Press. I did my Hauntings of the Hudson River Valley with them. And I said, look, I have a book idea. Should I send you a proposal? They said, why don't you send us the book? You know, how close are you? You know,
That's just
they
in the
wanna know
last,
everything like-
15
Now they're
years.
trying-
That's
because
changed.
They're learning. They're
Yeah.
learning that self-publishers, I mean, I've self-published books, literally, Mary Loved Daisies. I finished this book, had it in what I called the finished form a month ago.
And it's out.
It's ready for the shelves. So, you know, you're talking months instead of years.
But I would say what you get with traditional publishing is you get an editorial eye.
Yes, you do.
And you get a copy editor who's looking at your grammar.
And you get serious advertising
And you
in
get-
magazines,
yes.
libraries.
And that's not on your dime. If you're self-publishing, that's on
That's
your
right.
your dime. And now you, as my agent, I worked for about 10 years without an agent, and then I
Right.
have a lovely agent, and but she keeps reminding me when I'm complaining. She keeps reminding me it's their trucks, it's their paper, it's their covers,
I know,
it's their
I know.
distribution connections.
their dime.
Yeah,
You're right.
yeah. So you do. I mean, just to be on the other side
Yeah,
of the
you have
coin.
to be. Yeah, and you know, there a lot goes into it. And you're talking serious bucks. And in reality, when you're self-publishing, it's very hard to get it from your living room or your office to the public.
Oh,
And
it's
not
very.
cheap.
And also just the deadline. The deadlines keep me honest. I don't think I could write without a deadline.
Yeah.
It's for me.
Yep.
Some people can,
Yeah.
but for me, I can't. I need to know that it's all that school training. You're in
Oh,
trouble
I
if
know,
you miss
I
the
know.
deadline.
And that is something I want to get into a little bit because a lot of our audience is made up of writers. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about writing for a minute. You write at the kitchen table?
I used to.
Me
I
too.
started out that
Me
way.
too. So, where, when, how do you write? Do you have a set time, place? Are you regimented?
Well, the core of my writing success was having children. Because I knew from the minute they went to school or the minute the babysitter arrived,
That's your time.
I was writing, and then when they came home from school or the babysitter had to leave, it was over.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say I wouldn't run behind schedule, and then sometimes usually after Jeopardy is over, then I'll run back to my wherever I'm writing. I've written in a walk-in closet. I've written in
I hear you.
yeah, all over.
What I have done for a long time is because once I started writing, the first baby came, and I was already taken up by that time. Mm-hmm. So I went to the night, and I was a teacher for 30 years. So you have papers to correct.
Oh,
you know,
teaching is exhausting.
Oh, there was so much, and you know, I was a wrestling coach, and so I was worn out at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
So I finally found a way to write in the middle of the night
Ah.
because the phone doesn't ring.
But how
No one
did you
knocks at
sleep?
the door, and what I had to do was sleep for 3-4 hours, and then I'd get up and I'd write, and I'd have to sneak my time in. But I found that 3 hours of late night writing was 8 hours of daytime writing because I was always interrupted. And I needed that space to focus. And I was just constantly interrupted.
I know.
So, middle of the night is for me.
And you didn't feel sleep deprived the next day?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes. But I hate to say this, but I would rather feel sleep deprived than creativity deprived.
Yes, I can
and
understand
I was
that.
haunted by my stories. I needed to get them done. You know, and I just needed that space. And not every writer is the same.
No.
And that's why I always ask my writers, come on, where do you write? Do you use a computer? Do you have a laptop? Do you have what do you do?
I always used the PC, but it
Yeah.
broke, so I went to my laptop.
Yeah.
I can't write longhand. Longhand.
I
Some
know.
writers
I wrote
do.
Kiss the Candy Days Goodbye. My first book was all longhand. I gave myself carpal tunnel.
Oh, did you? I believe
I
it.
did, and because I was writing and writing, I have a box this big of handwritten files for that book. And it was awful because, once the computer came out, I was like, yes. First, it was the Selectric typewriter.
Yes, yes.
And I was like, yes!
I
Different fonts.
I
Oh
used
my
to
God.
stay late at work to
Yeah,
use their Selectrics, yeah.
And because I had these books where I needed to have some of the books some of the words in italics, and I wanted to play with the fonts, and you can't do that with a typewriter. Well, Selectric,
Yeah.
you change the ball. Oh man, it was like wonderful. And then when the computers came, that blew me away because whiteout went out the window, and then you're able to go, oh, I want to change it.
Yeah.
It's like,
Or cut.
whoa.
Oh no, this belongs over here. Cut and paste. Yeah.
You could just pick it up, move
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
whole chapters, just change them. And,
Yeah, no.
It was a whole new world. So you do use computers.
I've used a computer ever since my second book. My Nancy Drew, I was already on the
Wow.
computer.
Now, so let's go through now. So you did your Barcode books, and then there was Nancy Drew in there. You
Well,
even got
Nancy Drew-
Titanic in there.
Well, the first half of my career, to like 2004, was doing a lot of commercial work. Was
Okay.
doing the work for hire, they call it, when you get you may not even get a credit. You just
Yeah, you
and
just did it. Right.
one of my early things was for Beverly Cleary. There's a little book
Oh,
of
Beverly Cleary,
Ramona's fill-in chapter book. So
Yeah.
I've done some good ghostwriting for some
Yeah.
good people.
I had authors that I used when I was a teacher to turn kids on because there were kids who just didn't want to read. And I found that if I could marry one of these kids to an author and get them going, they would say, now, Beverly Cleary was. she was
Oh, I
so-
love Beverly Cleary.
And
And I
of
only
course,
did, just
Judy
want to
Blume.
say, I only did one book, for one fill-in diary book for Beverly Cleary. That's all I did.
Yeah.
But this book won a 2005 Quick Pick, American Library Association Quick Pick for Reluctant Young Readers.
Wow.
So it's the same kind of thing you're talking about. It's, I'm not going crazy with the vocabulary. I'm
Right.
not even going crazy with description.
Quick, easy
or-
read, but important.
But yeah, there's a thing I do sometimes graded readers that come into the school system. That was one of my side jobs at the first half. And they're called high-low, high interest, low
Right,
reading
yep,
level.
Yep.
As a teacher, you
Yeah,
might know that,
That's what
yeah.
I'm hoping that Mary Love Dacey's is.
Uh-huh.
A person can read this book in 1 hour. I know because I taped it. So what I'm trying to do is I'm going to do an audio of this
Uh-huh,
book that'll go with it so that reluctant readers can actually hear me read it while they read it.
Oh, cool.
along. And it goes very quickly because it's done in verse.
Oh, that's such a skill.
Yeah, and
I couldn't do that.
It's it's a whole new thing I'm trying to do. I also did emails to a paranormal in the same form.
Wow.
And this is for high school.
Do you write poetry as well?
I'm not that big on poetry. The idea here is that it's therapeutic, that the protagonists need to work through problems. This one, the protagonist works through grief. This one, the protagonist works through the supernatural. His father is able to speak to the dead, and he has the power also. It's just they're both sensitive. They're working together, and the father's training the boy. But the father, at the beginning of the book, gets into a head-on collision, and he dies. And the boy is trying to reach his father, but he can't. So he turns to the paranormal to try to understand what being dead is. What is the world beyond? So that's what this book does. And this book is actually also for readers who have difficulty with the paranormal. Now you are into hauntings and Frankenstein and
That's been in the
Yeah,
most
tell me
recent,
about
that's been my area. Even in the Barcode Tattoo, though, one of the things that happens to them, they're rebelling against this very fascistic kind of group that's taken over, and they go up into the Adirondack Mountains, and they become in touch with themselves. And they have a leader who is based on a woman, I believe she's passed away since I met her, but her name was Utona Dunn, and she was a Cherokee shaman. And I really met her in my life, and she was impressed me, a very powerful figure. And so I put her in the book.
Oh, wonderful.
And they meet Utona, and she sort of teaches them to transcend this this oppressive government by using their minds, and they become telepathic. And so as early as my first,
That's my kind of- yeah, that's
yeah,
good.
and
I have to read all these.
yeah, and she, so
Right up my alley.
so I kept that sort of paranormal theme has been in a lot of my books. And you know, first of all, I feel that I'm a little sensitive. I'm not the Long Island medium, but
Yeah.
I
sensitive.
I do think I am.
I feel the same way.
Yeah.
I feel that they speak through me and get me to write their stories for them.
The book I felt that the most was in Distant Waves, because I just felt that I was just channeling stuff that I would then go on the internet and say, who knew that? That's just what I did.
Yeah, that's what emails to a paranormal. I'm sitting here saying, oh my God, this isn't me. You know, somebody wants this story.
So many writers say that, though, that they
yeah.
feel. Who wrote The Alchemist? I was just reading an interview, Paulo Coelho.
Yeah.
Well, he said the same thing in this interview I just read. He said, I was a good instrument for this story.
Yeah.
And you don't always feel that way. Some
No.
books I take on, I have come up with the idea, I think it's a good idea, but it's a slog. I'm like, where is this going? I don't know.
I know.
But some just come whoop, right through.
Yeah, Hauntings of the Hudson River. There's a 17-year-old boy who was arrested and hanged, the only boy to hang in Putnam County for a crime. He was 18 years old. And this kid has been talking to me all along. And I did a whole chapter on him in here. Man, there are things that came out of that trial. When I read through some of the things, I understand exactly why this boy is talking to me. And it's scary stuff. So tell me about, this is about the Titanic.
Well, they asked me for a book about the Titanic, as I said, and I have to say, to the credit of David Levithan and Scholastic, they let me get away with some wild stuff.
And that's so important, to let you be able to be free to do what you need to do to tell your story.
When I turned this in, he said to me, that's not what I was expecting, but I think it works.
And it worked. Well,
yeah.
that's it. That's the thing, that it works. So you wrote this book. Now, did you have to go somewhere to get all this information? What about the research end? A lot of my books involve serious research. And I tell my writers the same thing. I don't care if you're doing fiction or nonfiction. You need to do your homework. When I did Kiss the Candy Days Goodbye, I went and spent nights in the hospital so I could see what my boy saw. You know, and get there and feel it.
It does make a difference. I mean, the internet, one of my first things I do when I take on a project, I type in the year, because I do a lot of historical-based stories. I type in the year and I see everything that's happening. I go and I try and find out what's the science at the time, what's the culture at the time, what's the fashion at the time, what things are going on, and then you have to go out from there. I mean, that's a good starting point. But like, I went to Edinburgh when I did Dr. Frankenstein's Daughters, because I have, in Mary Shelley's book, Frankenstein, he goes to the Orkney Islands, which are a string of islands north of Scotland, to create the Bride of Frankenstein. And it's really just a paragraph saying he's gone to this windswept island. But it captured me somehow.
Yeah, and sometimes you have to do that.
Yeah, so I went, and I then have some scenes in Edinburgh, too. So I went to the Orkney Islands, I went to Edinburgh, and then I went back and made major changes on what I had written. I was at the draft stage at that point. I had already submitted a thing, and it came back from my editor with changes. But luckily I went, because just to get that feel of the cobblestones in Edinburgh and the buildings and the narrow passageways.
That's the kind of writer I am, too. Now, a lot of this led to this.
Yes.
So let's take a look at these. These are two of your recent books.
That's what I'm working on, yes.
Good. Tell me about the Haunted Museum series.
Okay, the Haunted Museum series, I was asked for a series that would be Twilight Zone-ish. And appropriate for grades 4 to 6. This is younger. This is considered grades 4 to 6. This is what they call middle grade.
Great.
And I had written a short story, getting back to R.L. Stine. I wrote a short story. He collected a bunch of stories, and I think the proceeds went to the Mystery Writers Association. and he asked me to do a story for him, and I did one called Suckers. And it got a review where they said it had an end that the Twilight, Rod Serling would die for. So that was great, and I thought that was particularly pleasing because one of my influences, I think, of being a writer was when I was a kid, my mother would not let us stay up to see the Twilight Zone.
Oh yeah.
But in the morning, she would watch it after we were in bed, and I think the Twilight Zone is one of the greatest series ever written.
Oh yes.
It's sort of a template for good writing.
Yep.
And she would tell us at breakfast what happened.
Oh, that's
I think better than seeing it was to allow yourself to imagine it as she's telling the story. So anyway, and I had this sort of paranormal background, and so they thought of me for this series, and I started to write it. And it's been a lot of fun, so much fun.
So you have 2 books out on the series.
2 books are out.
And you have another one you're working on?
The 3rd book is written and it has a cover. You could see it online. And the 4th one is in the editorial stage. So.
Wow. All right. Unbelievably, just as I promised, time is flying.
It is.
So we have about a minute and a half
to
tell the audience what you need to tell them about Suzanne Weyn and writing.
Well, I'll tell you about the Haunted Museum because
Do that.
that's a good sort of takes everything in.
Good.
I used to start with an outline. Now I do a half an outline. Because I found that flying without an outline is too much because you're developing the story as you're trying to look at the language.
You need direction.
Yeah. But I found that doing an entire I like to know how the story ends before I begin.
Me too.
But some authors don't.
Get to it.
And add scenes and characters in the middle.
Yep.
So I start with sort of a very loose outline, and I try to think of my audience always. What is a story that is compelling and will take them along? When Henry says to me that book moved me right along, I'm like, good.
Yes,
it doesn't even have to make sense as long as it moves.
Exactly.
Yeah, as long as it engages you, it moves. I try to make them make sense. But and that's my editor. Sometimes having an editor, I just let it out there, and I think my editor is going to catch when I'm not catching any sequence of time errors, any kind of logical errors. The editor will catch them, and then the copy editor will catch it secondarily.
Well, guess what, Suzanne?
Time's up.
I hate to say it.
Oh, it's been so much fun.
Man, I can't get enough of this lady. A lot of wonderful things. You certainly should be reading Suzanne Weyn. A lot of good books. A lot of interesting things. You're at the beginning of your career. I could see it. I could feel it.
Good.
It's all happening. You are on the rise, and you heard it here. Thank you for tuning in to Let's Talk Writing, and thank you for sharing all of these wonderful things with us.
Thank you, Vinny.
A pleasure to have you.
It's been my pleasure.
And a pleasure to have you here. Well,
It's fun.